Worrying trends are starting to emerge as the country battles to lower the crime rate. There's been a spike in kidnappings for ransom and crimes committed to defraud insurance companies. To discuss, I'm now joined by Mawere from Makesure Risk Solutions and Chad Thomas from IRS Forensic Investigators. Night, you're in studio. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you to your listeners that are joining us.
Chad, appreciate you joining us via our video link. How are you?
Great this side, a warm Sunday greeting to you and the viewers.
Fantastic. Knight, I'm going to start off with you. Now, there's been an increase in kidnappings targeting lower and middle income individuals. What specific features does kidnapping and ransom insurance offer to protect families or individuals that are at risk?
Thanks, Hugo. Thanks, Chad. I think what we are seeing, maybe before I probably answer you correctly there, is that we are trying to see a very worrying trend. Maybe Chad, the expert, will give us a bit of more insight in terms of the statistics. But what you're worrying that sub-Saharan Africa, it has already started to increase, probably contributing to over 20% of the worldwide kidnappings and stuff. So when you look at ransom and kidnap insurance, what we call the KNR, we're looking at an insurance that covers individuals or even companies against that kidnappings, extortion, and anything that might happen that is associated with that. When such an unfortunate event happens, there's a lot of trauma that also comes and accompanies that with. So there's also that kind of third-party people that have to counsel or crisis management specialists that will be needed in terms of that. So yeah, so it literally covers you that and gives you the piece. Mainly it used to be high net worth individuals and probably large corporates that also have got maybe employees across the globe, and then they want to look after those and probably cover them from eventuality like kidnappings in terms of that. So yeah.
Chad, you'd obviously be familiar with the factors that lead to some individuals being more susceptible to kidnapping and requests for ransom than others. What are some of those key factors?
So we're in a bit of a unique situation in South Africa. Kidnap and ransom has been around forever, but we've always heard about the very famous kidnappings, the Lindbergh kidnapping, the Getty kidnappings. And kidnap for ransom as an insurance policy came out very strong in the 1970s and 80s, specifically for European and American companies whose employees were in high-risk areas where there was oil, areas where there was precious minerals, and areas, of course, where civil fighting was taking place. On a side note, what's very strange to note is John Grisham, who's a very famous author about legal practices, has actually released his most recent fiction book, and it relates to a kidnap and ransom case. So kidnap and ransom, we're seeing getting more and more publicity throughout the world. South Africa is slightly different to other countries. We more like South America in the late 80s, early 90s, going into the 2000s, where kidnap for ransom originally targeted high net worth individuals, but we're now seeing kidnap for ransom targeting all communities in South Africa. So where you can see a moneyed businessman being kidnapped and a ransom being charged in the tens of millions of rands, we've seen children in informal settlements being kidnapped and their parents are expected to pay a few hundred up to a couple of thousand rand. The statistics are frightening. We're the highest kidnap for ransom nation in Africa and the seventh highest in the world. 85% of our kidnap victims are women and children, so it is targeting the more vulnerable in our society. We are seeing the police taking this very seriously, with crime intelligence setting up kidnapping dedicated task teams. However, with the copycats on the increase, we're seeing a surge in kidnappings, and not just kidnap for ransom, also express kidnappings, where people are being held against their will so they can access to their devices for multi-factor authentication so that their accounts can be cleaned out. So we're also seeing a rise in this. And of course, violence in South Africa is known throughout the world. Kidnapping is an additional contact crime that can be violent, which just adds to the violent crime statistics. We're the highest in the world for kidnappings when it comes to the type of express kidnappings we've seen, and we're the seventh highest in the world for kidnap and ransom.
Now, let's talk about putting together some of the products that are available. What are some of the key considerations for individuals that might be looking to take up kidnapping and ransom insurance?
Thanks, Hugo. And one of the major things that Chad also mentioned is the rise of express kidnappings, which means that that is no longer, that insurance is no longer just for the big corporates, but for ordinary people like you and I. And one of the big considerations that you now need to look at is the affordability and also the coverage that you're looking at. So it's very key that you need to look at and say, at how much can I afford in terms of insurance and what kind of coverage do I have? The risk factors that also come into you. What are the kind of risks that you possess as an individual? But as Chad was also mentioning, that you also need to look at one of the major things that we see is the vulnerable, the women and the kids. So you must be able to also a cover that also looks after your family, your wife and your kids. So the major key is what kind of work am I involved in? Also, that also is very key. What kind of brand of a company am I also probably involved in? Because as much, if your company does not take that initiative to get that kidnapping ransom, you might also look and say, okay, I'm working in a very high risk brand that probably might attract kidnapping ransom, because what these guys are looking for is literally money. I think previously, as you were saying, back then it would be like a political thing, but now people are looking for money. So they want to wipe out, so they might assume that, okay, you go work for Newzroom Afrika, probably they might be able to pay. You also need to look at the area that you are looking at. So there's a lot of factors. What is the risk, that area that I'm living in? Am I in a very high risk area, or a country? But as Charlie said, that South Africa, we are now seeing a huge spike in terms of the kidnapping ransom. So you need to look at your affordability also.
So I don't know if this, Chad, if you would respond to this. So whilst criminals are criminals, and whoever kidnaps you is a criminal for all intents and purposes, but there also seems to be rules to the game, that in many instances these kidnappers will say, okay, give us X amount of money, you pay that amount, and we will release this individual. In many times, many occasions, this happens. It's almost like part of the code of kidnappers, that if you kidnap someone, you get paid a ransom, then you go ahead and you release the individual. But there have been instances that we've read about in the past of one individual, I think in KZN, in the last 10 days or so, who was kidnapped. A certain amount of ransom was demanded, that ransom was paid, and he was eventually found dead.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. We're not privy to all the details of all the kidnappings, and nor the statistics true of the actual situation. A lot of families do comply with kidnappers from the get-go, and they don't communicate with third-party law enforcement, or even with specialized security or investigation companies. When I talk about those statistics about being number one in Africa, about being seventh in the world, about having the fastest growth in express kidnappings, we also need to understand that there's other kidnappings included in that. There's kidnappings from a GBV perspective. There's kidnappings for child trafficking. There's kidnapping for sex slavery. So there's a lot that contributes towards the statistics, but also we don't have accurate statistics of what transpires and what happens and how many of the kidnap for ransom cases are resolved, because a lot of them are unreported. The fact of the matter remains is that we need to ensure that people are equipped to deal with these situations, and that means everybody, because as I mentioned, you could be kidnapped for a variety of reasons. So we have to ensure that we have habits and routines in place, that if those routines aren't met, families are able to pick up, or friends are able to pick up, that somebody's not keeping to a routine. There's this misconception you have to wait 48 hours until somebody's missing. That's absolute nonsense. You can report it immediately if it's suspicious or if somebody hasn't stuck to their routine. We all carry mobile devices. We should be able to have some or other tracking device on that our friends and families are privy to. We mustn't live in this world of absolute privacy. We need to understand that this is such a massive problem that we need to fight it from a community base. Also, we talk about this war on crime, but without having specialized units and expanded, dedicated task teams with more resources, we're not going to combat this. There's a reason why it's growing in South Africa, and the reason is that there's little to no consequences or accountability, hence the reason we're seeing so many more copycat kidnapping syndicates growing in South Africa.
Now, considering the recent stats and the trends that we're talking about, much of which Chad is speaking of, how do you envision the future of kidnapping insurance evolving in South Africa?
It has, and it has to evolve, and I think we're already starting to see that it's evolving. Once insurance companies start to see a trend, I think they now need to incorporate that into their insurance offering. So we are seeing a lot of, but the major problem is that it's a specialist type of insurance. Not every insurer is going to take on it because of the complexities that are involved in executing or that insurance coverage. You were asking Chad just recently to say you're seeing some other people that others get retained and others unfortunately ultimately will lose their lives. What we always encourage, if you've got a cover, is very key that you quickly get in touch with your insurance, and they'll be able to use the third parties like your security experts that are able to handle this. Because if any of your family members involved, I think there's a lot of emotion and a lot of amateurish of how we handle that. And I think it's a sector that needs people that are really trained to that. So there's a lot of specialist security crisis management companies that are able to handle this and ensure the safe return of people. And that's what insurance companies do.
Chad, how much of kidnapping is based on access to information? I mean, how much of it is an inside job? Because I'd imagine, on the one hand, it might be a case where kidnappers randomly assume that, okay, Chad is worth so much, so if we take him and we ask for X amount, then we'll be able to get it. But another is also about just how much information do they have access to? I mean, you talked, Chad, just now about, well, you have a routine, and if that routine is not followed. So they obviously have an understanding of where's the best place to pick up Chad, and whom do we reach out to for money, and should families cooperate?
Hugo, you're 100% on the money there. The copycat syndicates that we're seeing targeting the informal settlements, the traditional township type environments in the working class areas, they're opportunistic. Whereas your sophisticated syndicates that we saw coming out of Maputo, moving into Mahikeng, then moving into areas of Polokwane, later into Laudium, Lenasia, Fordsburg, then to KZN, they were targeting specific communities. They had actionable intelligence. They knew who the businessmen were, what kind of security details they had. They knew that they were involved in cash businesses and what the family should be able to afford. So the information is definitely coming from within communities, and it's targeting specific individuals. This is when we talk about the high level, the high profile kidnappings. And then the others, the more opportunistic, they watch the people, they watch their patterns, they know if the parents are working, and then they target those family members. So it's definitely intelligence driven. And if we don't break the backs of these syndicates, we just see them multiplying because people see that it's an easy way to get money.
Now, I'd imagine that one of those problems, Chad, with breaking the syndicates is that by nature of syndicates, they're powerful criminal organizations.
Well, we're seeing that syndicates are crossing over into other areas. So CRT syndicates are also involved in murder for hire. Murder for hire are involved in hiring out guns and vehicles to people that are involved in kidnapping. So there's always a crossover of syndicates. They hire their soldiers from the same organizations. If you look at the Izinkabi that come from KZN, they're all well known to one another. Vehicles, they go to specific vehicle theft syndicates to get them the vehicles that they're going to use in the execution of the crimes, and the same when it comes to the weapons. They have specific suppliers of all this equipment. And like I said, 1 month maybe part of CRTs, they may move across into murder for hire. From murder for hire, they may move across into kidnapping. They've monetized crime at every single level.